I think that's got to be the most important thing, is the people that you work with. And of course, we're very lucky with what we get to cook with, but there's no doubt that there's like a lot of monotony in a job of being a chef or being a front of house person.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Applying your craft and making a name for yourself in a regional setting requires a very different approach to that of chefs in the capital cities. With many making the move from the city to the regions, what's it like to reverse that trend and go from the country to the city? Does it change the way you cook? Ali Currey-Voumard is the head chef of Public Wine Shop in Melbourne, Victoria. Ali, how are you?
Hey, I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you on the show. You've had a fascinating career to date, even though you're still quite young. You came from the countryside in Tasmania with a well-known restaurant, Agrarian Kitchen, into Melbourne. What was that transition like for you?
Well, I mean, I had lived in Melbourne previously. So, I mean, the move down to Agrarian was from Melbourne, so I guess I kind of bunny hopped back again. So it wasn't totally new, I guess.
Tell us about your time in Tasmania. You spent quite a bit of time there and really rose the ranks at the Agrarian. What was the reason for moving to Tasmania?
So I was born and raised in Tasmania and did school down there. And towards the end of my schooling, I'm not sure if you know as well, but in Tasmania, it might have changed now, but high school just goes to year 10. And then you go to college or you choose a trade or etc. So I finished year 10 and chose to trade. And a lot of that was due to the fact that I was already working kind of as a kitchen hand in a restaurant called Smalt that doesn't exist anymore. There was a man working there called Luke Burgess, who you might be familiar with, whose best friend was a man called Rodney Dunn, who'd just opened the Agrarian Kitchen cooking school in Lachlan in the Derwent Valley, about 40 minutes out of Tasmania. And so I met Rodney then when I was 16 and ended up doing quite a lot of volunteering out there and getting in the garden as much as possible. And every time then I moved to Melbourne a year after that. But every time I came back to visit family, I would always go and visit Rodney and Severine. And it was a very it was kind of like a good, the city was very big and busy, and especially in those days you were definitely working a lot. And to come back to somewhere like Agrarian where it's so clear why you'd cook when you're out there, it's just everything makes so much sense, and it's so the produce is so beautiful, and the the temperature is beautiful. It's all it's very idyllic, and it's a good grounding place, I guess. And so one time when I returned there when I was about 23, Rodney said they were opening a restaurant, and did I want to come and be the head chef there? And so I said yes, and that was that. Yeah.
Well, I want to explore what you did there when you took that role, but you mentioned you left Tassie for Melbourne. Tell us about that step into food. Was it an easy transition? Was it something you'd thought about from when you were young?
Well, I'd done a year of my apprenticeship already in Tassie from when I was 16 to 17. And it had been on my mind for the last year of high school as well. I'd kind of gotten into it as a weekly chore, I guess. My mum was ready for me to do a little bit more around the house. It was either cooking or laundry. And so it was a pretty easy choice. And then I loved it and started doing it as often as I could and reading her recipe books and doing that kind of thing. And I worked for a year in Tasmania, but this was before the time of Garage East and Franklin and all of that kind of thing. And there wasn't a lot to go on. And I had brothers and sisters that lived in Melbourne. So I made the transition up to the big smoke, which was good. It was a big transition, definitely.
What was it like having grown up in Tasmania? What did you think of the food scene in Melbourne and those steps into the food industry?
I was 17 when I moved over. I was like blown away and got very engulfed in it very quickly. Yeah, it was like worlds away. It was incredible.
Tell us about the first stepping stones that you had with venues. What were the real important venues you worked at when you were just starting off your career?
Well, I worked at businesses owned by Andrew McConnell the whole time that I was here. So I had a friend who'd worked at Smalt who was working at Cumulus. And so I went in and applied for a job as a second-year apprentice and got that. And that was like very pivotal in like so many ways. It was like that was maybe the second year that Cumulus had been open, and it was like an extremely like important restaurant. Like still now, but especially of that time, it was like very, very different to how other restaurants were running, I think. And it was buck wild working there. It was like before the time. I think that I sort of came into cooking right at the cusp of the time when, like you didn't make it easy on yourself, like at all. We'd have like dishes working on the hot section there that had like you'd only have 4 burners to share between 2 of you. Sorry, maybe 6 burners, and you were feeding like 300 people a night, and like one dish on its own would take up like the grill and 2 pots or something like that. It was like not efficient, but it was very beautiful, and like very good. Learned a lot about cooking, like definitely in that time, and then followed Josh Murphy, who was the head chef there at the time, over to Moon Underwater and the Builder's Arms, which was also incredible. And I met lots of people that remain very dear to me today, including Josh. But then after about 6 years of working very hard in those kind of kitchens, I decided I needed to not cook for a year. And so I went and worked on the floor at Marion instead.
Before we explore that switch that you had, take us into the kitchen with Josh Murphy and also Andrew McConnell. Do you have any stories of what it's like to work with them and the influence they had on you? For
sure. Andrew was around a little bit, but I had a lot more to do with Josh, who, how can I word what he was like? He was an asshole who is like a very treasured friend and like extreme mentor, and one of the chefs I still look up to the most in Melbourne now. But he certainly had, it was like 12 years ago. So he had, he still had that old way of teaching lessons and etc. Which I don't think are important to go into in depth. But the lessons that he did teach were very pivotal. There was he like had a really good handle on humility. Like he wasn't ego driven in the least. Like he would be harsh if you weren't respecting the food or that kind of thing. But that was sort of his like main, that was the only thing he'd really be harsh about. So that was like a really big lesson I've like learnt. Like humility is so important, I think, in kitchens and yeah, that was probably the biggest, respecting the ingredients and like having a lot of humility and were like the biggest takeaways from working in those places.
You mentioned the switch to the front of house at Marion. Did that change your perspective on the front of house role, or what sort of impact did it have on you, that change?
Oh my gosh, totally. It's so, especially back then, like it was so easy to sort of have an us versus them mentality, especially when you're working a lot in the kitchen and you're traditionally in a role that you cop a bit more of a beating, I guess. And then you see front of house come and you're like, oh, you bastards, like, what's that about? But then I worked on the floor. I was like, well, this is so hard. Like, this is this is just as stressful, if not more stressful, during service. And it's a whole like different skill set working there. So I had like a new understanding of like that it was you're a team, you're all a team, and so definitely to answer your question.
What did you enjoy about working in front of house?
I enjoyed lots of things. It's really fun getting to see the customers properly, kind of develop a relationship with them over the course of half an hour or 2 hours or whatever, and especially returning guests is like a real joy to get to know those people, and like there's a joy to sort of know a wine that might really work for that person because they drank this one the last time, or things like that. And it's the same. There's so many similarities to cooking. It's a lot of like organisation and ordering in your head of like how you're going to pace out your next 10 moves, you know? So that's like a fun, fast-paced challenge as well.
Andrew McConnell's influence in Melbourne is extraordinary. You spent a lot of years in the group. What do you think is the secret to the success of the group, having worked so many years within it?
I couldn't say, I don't think. It's like they've got there's so much training and room for growth and movement, I guess, within all the restaurants now. It's been, as much as I worked there for 6 or 7 years, it's been about 6 or 7 or 8 years since I worked there last. So I couldn't comment on what they're doing now, but I know certainly then that the growth and training that's offered is I would imagine second to none.
Tell us about that move back to Tasmania and the opportunities that you were afforded. Were you nervous about such a big change?
Totally, yeah. And it was big because I went straight from working front of house at Marion to then running a kitchen in the Derwent Valley, which was pretty, I guess, a big change, but good. I was excited for it by then. I felt rested, which is so important. I guess it was pretty crazy, very, very different to restaurants in Melbourne, obviously, because in here you have your list of suppliers and everyone delivers every day and all of that kind of thing. In Tassie, no one delivers to the Derwent Valley. They just don't. And there's no veg company of that kind of thing. There's places that you can go and pick up your odds and ends, but you have to do all of that in the morning before you go and do prep. But on the flip side as well, we had such connection to the people who were growing or rearing the produce and that kind of thing. I guess building on those foundations that I spoke about respecting what you're cooking. It was crazy. You couldn't not. It was you'd meet all these people and form relationships with them and talk directly to them. So it was this crazy little puzzle. There was no one supplier that you get all your dry goods from or that you get all your meat from or anything like that. You had 20 for each different little thing. But it was great. It's so important.
Do you have any stories of the connections that you made with different producers and some of the products that you got to use while you were there?
So there was all sorts. There was lots of people. Rodney was I was watching actually. The eatery opened 5 years ago, so it was 5 years ago almost to the day. And so something popped up on my Facebook that was a little video from Win News in Tasmania, talking to Rodney the day before the eatery opened. And it's him just being if you have got trees in your backyard that have got fruit, we want them. And that was it. We'd put things on Facebook Marketplace saying do you have a fruit tree? And so you'd drive all around Hobart buying these couple of boxes of Maya lemons somewhere or a bunch of raspberries from somewhere else. So that was really fun. And like I said, that's it's not how things operate here, you know? So that was pretty special. And there were loads of characters around, definitely.
Well, take us into the kitchen with that sort of a way of getting produce. What sort of impact did it have on the menu and your dish creation?
I think it was a pretty interesting journey food-wise at Agrarian. I think it was, I wasn't super confident in what, I don't know the right way to phrase this, because I definitely wouldn't say it was me. Like, I think, and a thing that's really important to me is that it's like, it's not what I was cooking at Agrarian, it's what we were cooking there together, and what, like, I was managing the kitchen, but like everyone was cooking the food, you know. So I really want to be careful to not say that it was me doing anything. But I guess in terms of our collaboration and that kind of thing at the start, I think it took a little while for us to learn and for me to get the confidence to not sort of trick things up a little bit or feel like they needed a little bit more. And the produce was like very much crying out to just be cooked simply. And we definitely did that to a stage, but I think if I was doing it again, I would go like even simpler still than how we cooked. But I guess to answer your question, that like it was, the kitchen was like very much designed to cook all of this food with like extreme love and care. Like we had amazing like a big wood-fired hot smoker and wood-fired oven and wood grill and like these big beautiful like inbuilt pasta cookers so we could do that, and like everything was built to cook this produce very well, and I think that's what we did.
Do you have any menus or dishes from that time that sort of stand out as you were sort of working in collaboration with the team, but sort of spoke of what the agrarian eating experience was?
We had potato cakes on that went bloody off all the time. But they were great. Like it was using our like sourdough starter as the batter, and like locally dug potatoes. Like they were awesome. So that was like that didn't leave the menu the whole time that I was there. And there were lots of things. We had like an amazing pastry chef who just like had such a beautiful way with sweets and desserts. So we always had like these very beautiful pies or tarts on. And it makes such a difference. Like I don't know if I'd ever be able to do an apricot pie or something here and not like those apricots that we were using were just like from around the corner, and I've never tasted anything. Like it was just crazy. So I think things like just little things like that. We just sometimes get the most like beautiful things, beautiful. I remember getting like some really amazing blue mackerel once that was still like it had been killed a little while ago, and it was like a very proud moment of kind of we just put it on just sliced with some olive oil and lemon or something, and it was like we don't need to do anything there. So yeah, there was like dishes like that stand out in my memory.
Did the experience at the Agrarian sort of change your approach to food? What sort of impact did your time there have on you?
I think it changed my approach to food a bit. I think that probably what was even a bigger lesson for me it was my first time being a manager. So that was a really interesting time, and I think from my experiences of being managed, probably in a harsh but very effective way, I didn't really want to operate in that way. I wanted to be able to get the same results, with kindness. And I think it was an interesting lesson for me in which is totally possible, by the way. Like kindness is prevails all, especially in leadership, I think. But I think it was probably difficult for me to draw a line somewhere between like a manager and a friend. And so I think I got a little bit exhausted, emotionally exhausted by the end there of probably going further than what was required of me. So that was a big lesson for me, and a big learning. Not so much a lesson. There was but it shaped me a lot, I guess.
Tell us about leaving the Agrarian, and was that a difficult time for you to leave and to take on something else?
Well, it was sort of when Rodney offered me the job, I always said I will do this, but probably only for 2 years, because I wasn't ready to settle yet. And I was still very young, and still am very young, and just wanted a little bit more experience, I guess, in other fields. So no, it wasn't difficult leaving. It had come up to 2 years, basically, and I was ready to hang up responsibility, I guess, for a little bit and do some more cooking, because I didn't cook that much at Agrarian. I did lots of like prep and that kind of thing, but it was lots of coordinating and managing more so.
Tell us about the time after that. You mentioned that you wanted to do cooking again, or more cooking. Tell us about where you went and what you did.
So I went overseas. I was very lucky to get overseas towards the end of 2019 before, the travelling as we knew it ceased for a little bit. So I spent a little while in London and did some stages at a couple of restaurants there at Bright and Brawn and Peg, which was really good fun, really fun. And then from there went down to the Auvergne in France to a town called Clermont-Ferrand and worked at Le Saint-Eutrope, which is a little bistro there, with Harry Lester and Mike Hazel and the team I think I was there for 6 weeks, so just over summer, which was like maybe the most pivotal in terms of cooking itself thing that's happened for me. Yeah.
Do you have any stories of your time there and that sort of impact that it had?
I remember my first day there was quite funny. This is more of a funny story than a learning story, but it was just like I kind of got there and they were like having a very hairy lunch service. I was like, righto, like, what do you need me to do? And Harry was like, there's a pig to break down downstairs in the cool room. Like, I'm sure you know what you're doing. I'll just show you where the pig is and then off you go. And I was like, righto. And it was like, fucking massive pig. It was like so big. And it was on the floor of the cool room. So I had to try and like hoist it out, like, and get it up onto this bench. And like I had done like quite a bit of butchery, but like it was never like we had someone who did most of the butchery at Agrarian. It wasn't usually me. So I was like rusty on it. I was like, okay. So like trying to find the little spots of like where I could get enough connection to just like rewatch a video on how to break down a pig. And then like finally got there and like broke down this pig into all these bits. And he's like, right, now I need you to make cayettes, which are like, I'm not sure if you know, they're just like a very Auvergne classic, an Ardèche classic of like a big meatball or faggot, basically. He's like, all right, I need you to go get some sorrel from the market. Like, I'd only arrived in Clermont-Ferrand the night before. I was like, I don't know where the market is. And my phone didn't work outside of the Wi-Fi because I hadn't got a SIM card yet. And so it was just like, he was like, right, so you got to like go out the back gate, like press this button, it's next to the gate, then you go left again, then 2 rights, and then you're at the market, find this lady and you got to get it. I was like, oh my God. Like, I was like stumped at the back gate, like I couldn't find the button like, to get out to save myself. But anyway, I made it there, got sorrel, but I got it from the wrong lady, and Harry. So that was pretty funny. So that was a funny story. But then the rest was just like, it was really interesting watching. I'd never experienced like such a, because it's a very small, like independent little bistro, which are like not, I mean, Agrarian was independent, but it still had a cooking school attached, you know, so there's sort of a little group, and like every restaurant that I've ever worked for before had been part of a big group. And this just operated in like a very different, like quite romantic way. And that was like very exciting for sure.
You went travelling to Europe just before the pandemic. What sort of impact did it have on you?
Pretty big, sort of the same as everyone. So I got back from Europe in September, I think, and then worked at Franklin with my friend Pete Cooksley when he took over there. And then that was, again, just a little short gig because I had a residency coming up at the Summertown Aristologist in Adelaide, or in the Adelaide Hills. And that was meant to go for 2 months, and it started in late February 2020. So the pandemic kind of hit while I was there. And so I got cut from, we basically, like, it was all go, and I did a Sunday lunch there, and then on the Tuesday, like, everything was sort of blowing up, and I was like, I think I need to go home. Like, I think I need to get home before I can't, back to Tassie. And they said, yep. So that was after a month, and it shut down. And then I came back to Tassie in same as everyone, didn't work for a long time. Maybe like 3 months, 4 months, and then had a very bizarre year in terms of work in the I guess in the strongest sense, but it was also great in other ways. I ended up working a little bit at a butcher, and a little bit pouring beers at the very deservedly famous Tom McHugo's. But I spent a lot of time, I guess, exploring other vocations and like finding a hobby, and developing a relationship. And so it was good and bad, I guess, over that time.
Did it change your perspective on a future in hospitality and sort of what you wanted to get out of it? Enormously,
yeah. I think, and I think it's been like similar for a lot of people, especially in hospitality, because they sort of had like a forced break, right? And wasn't when they were holidaying or no one was doing anything. So it sort of gave this new perspective on like what life outside of work is a little bit. And I can't speak for everyone, but for me, I was like, oh, I like life. Like, this is groovy, and like learning new things, or, you know, listening to lots of music and that kind of thing, or being able to go out to nature. Like all of these things suddenly became like far more important than they had been in the past. I guess I'd been like very tunnel visioned on hospitality all the time, and this sort of like wiped that tunnel away a little bit. So it made a future career in hospitality very much more requirements were needed from me.
Tell us about how the opportunity at Public Wine Shop came about.
So I used to work with Campbell, who's the owner at Moon Underwater and the Builders Arms, I think in 2012. And we've remained friends ever since. And when the lockdown was starting, we had a phone call, and he was telling me how he just got the lease on a shop, basically. It was going to be a retail space, and then they do a wine bar, and they weren't sure what they'd do for food. Maybe I think the original idea was that they might get Meat Smith lasagnas or something, and they'll just heat them up and people can drink wine and eat lasagna, and it'll be great. And I was like, yeah, cool, that sounds good. And then about almost a year passed after that conversation, and my girlfriend and I were both kind of figuring out what to do. Tassie is a very beautiful place to live, but can be a bit hard in terms of opportunities for both study and work. And she sort of decided that she might like to move back to the mainland for a little bit for some study opportunities. And I was like, oh yeah, look, that sounds great. Maybe I'll just work anywhere. Like I'll go make some money or something. Because I guess that's the other big impact of the pandemic, was like we were poor for ages because you just couldn't get enough work, and JobSeeker wasn't that red hot after a while. And anyway, so I was like, yeah, great. Like maybe I'll get a catering job or something and just kind of sell my soul for a little bit to get back on my feet. And then I almost feel like this is a funny thing to say, but it's true. I had a literal dream, that I was working in a little like wine shop cooking pasta, and I was very happy. And I woke up and I was like, oh, that's what I'd rather do. And then I was like, fuck, Cam's got that shop. I'll give him a call. And so I did. And he said, yeah, great. let's do it. And so that's how that all started.
Well, tell us a bit about what you are doing there, and is it quite different to things you've done before?
It's super different. It's super different, and yet there are like similarities as well. So, what are we doing? I guess on paper we are a wine bar and retail shop. We're open 7 days a week, and the kitchen's open for dinner Monday to Saturday, and then on Sunday we do lunch. And any time around that we're open for bottles of wine, tins of fish, takeaway, whatever you like, basically. But it's really important to us, the model that Cam is working on with the wines is that they're all organic or biodynamic and nothing's added. And that's the same with the spirits and the same with 95% of the beers that we have as well. And so we wanted to take a really similar approach with the food. And I think, especially after some time at the St. Eutrope, and I guess more time with reading recipe books in 2020 and some of 2021, I just wanted to cook like very classic, like recognisable food. And there's like a lot of romance attached to that, and it's very, very joyful. So me and my friend and the sous chef here, Simon Ballsmith, just do that basically. We change the menu fairly often when we're kind of ready to try something new. Not as often as we used to change it, because we decided maybe we should be a bit kinder to ourselves and get some systems in place. But yeah, so we use as much organic produce as we possibly can, and as much from local farms, only ever ethical seafood, and yeah, just cook really, really seasonally, I guess, on an induction and a toaster grill.
Are there any sort of dishes that you're cooking at the moment that sort of really epitomises sort of what you're doing?
Well, the only thing that stays on the menu is the Earth mayonnaise, which is just kind of not quite soft boiled but not quite hard boiled egg with mayonnaise and anchovy, which is just like a big joy to eat. But yeah, it changes all the time. I think this week we're going to get in some duck and brine the legs and just serve them with lentils maybe. We've hopefully got some fish coming from a wonderful kind of co-op called Two Hands, which works with a couple of fishermen in the Corner Inlet as well as elsewhere. So we might do some pickled fish later in the week. We're just trying, I think, I guess with what I was saying about Agrarian, with not trying to trick things up, I think that we're doing that as much as possible here. It's just like if we get some lovely leeks in, we'll serve them with vinaigrette. And like that's a very nice thing to eat as part of a meal. And so just trying to cook that way as much as possible.
You mentioned the last couple of years gave you pause to sort of consider your career in hospitality and some caveats that you wanted to introduce. How different is your life, and have you found that sort of work-life balance?
Yeah, I think definitely finding it. I mean, I think it's a work in progress, you know. So I work at Public, which is great. I also do some consultancy in a kitchen role. So I guess I'm finding work-life balance. I think it's still new. We've only been open for a year here at Public, so it's only just getting into this kind of stage. I'm like, all right, like I might take an extra day off here and there and like I want to do like volunteering at a local radio station. So I really love music. And I think we're finding it. We're finding it. And it's hard. It's hard to get out of old habits of like saying you'll do an extra couple of hours, or like even saying that you only want to work your 40-hour week, but then being like, oh, I might just come in a bit early and like do this sort of thing. And then you're like, oh shit, like how did I do 45 hours again? So that's interesting. Yeah. But that's, that'll just ease out over time, I reckon.
It's extraordinary that you had a dream about the role that you wanted and then landed it.
Yeah, it's funny.
What do you love about what you do?
I really love working with people. Working with Simon is a really big joy, and we've been friends for a long time, and getting to cook. We worked together at Moon Underwater, and we lived together in Hobart for a little while. And so it like brings me a lot of happiness cooking with him. And like the entire team we have here. I think that's like a big, I don't know whether it's unspoken, but like I think that's got to be the most important thing, is the people that you work with. And because it's there's so many, of course, like we're very lucky with what we get to cook with, but there's no doubt that there's like a lot of monotony in a job of being a chef or being a front of house person. There's lots of dynamic things too, but for the most part, it's like you're sort of doing the same thing a lot of the time. So having these people around that can bring like joy and excitement and inspiration is like a really, it's crucial.
Well, Ali, it's amazing what you're up to these days after quite a crazy couple of years. Loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear your story. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Chat soon.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.